How do I watch this anime?
With your eyes, Bert.
Ahem. In what sequence of episodes should I go about consuming a particular piece of Japanese media that invokes the senses of sight and hearing such that my comprehension, understanding, and enjoyment are aligned with the creative intentions and existing realities of the work? This is a question that has been around for some time in the anime community. Imagine you're in Japan, it's June 2003, and you're in line to pick up the best light novel you can get your hands on. Kino's Journey is in its third year, which is a strong contender, but it's not new. I mean, of course you're going to get it, but you're also looking for something fresh, something exciting, something bizarre. It just so happens that as your eyes wander the shelves, you happen to notice a brand new series, The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. It's got aliens, it's got psychics, it's got time travelers. Surely it cannot disappoint. And it doesn't. In fact, it far surpasses your expectations, and it might even be one of your favorite novels. Time passes to March 2006. 5 more novels have been published, with the 7th expected to be released in May. The fan base is strong, with about 1.5 million collective copies of the novels having been sold, but even more important is the anime adaptation in April. This may be the best thing that happens for the series, but it could also spell disaster. Fortunately, it's being animated by Kyoto Animation. That's good. I mean, have you seen how amazing Air and Full Metal Panic 2 look? Your hopes are very high, and the fateful day arrives. It's April 3rd, the clock all zeros, midnight. You turn on the TV. What is this? You double check, this isn't the wrong channel, the TV isn't malfunctioning. Maybe the studio delivered the wrong CD to the broadcast channels? After all, this doesn't happen until the 6th novel, so maybe the entire anime has been botched? Despite your mind racing, it's too late at night to access the internet for more information. Heck, you're lucky enough that your parents let you stay up on a school night in the first place, and you'll need all the sleep you can get for that English exam tomorrow. With no other choice, you simply finish the episode. The next day at school, your friend asks you, "How was that Haruhi thing you've been talking about non-stop?" You turn in your seat, eyes dead from not having gotten a single minute of sleep. You stare at your friend for a moment, and then seemingly on impulse you say, "The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya is the greatest anime of all time." With that, a new religion is born. Haruhiism spreads like wildfire, the light novel sales nearly double in just a year, and before you know it, it's 2009. Season 2 is approaching, and some newcomers are wondering, how do they watch Haruhi Season 1? I mean, obviously you watch it in the broadcast order because the out-of-order release played a large part in generating interest for the anime, as well as thematically encapsulating the enigma of Haruhi. The problem being, which broadcast order, because the 2nd season is being aired as a true chronology, and the new episodes will drop whenever they fit into the timeline. That means that what used to be Season 1 episodes 2, 3, 5, 10, 13, and 14 are now Season 2 episodes 1 through 6. Season 1 episode 4 becomes Season 2 episode 7. Some of the episodes take place at the end of the timeline, so Season 2 episodes 1 through 14 will actually be Season 2 episodes 8 and 12 through 24. Not helpfully, a bunch of websites start spreading their own watch orders, causing confusion everywhere and leaving everyone asking the same question, how do I watch this anime? Welcome to Labra Stories. The original title of this video was, Does the Monogatari series even have a watch order? But after writing a 10-page essay about that, I realized it did, and so I decided to rewrite the entire thing to just be about what watch orders do and some controversial opinions about them. This is the importance of watch orders. There are 4 general types of watch order. The first is chronological, the second broadcast, and the third source material. The fourth is the random order, where you throw the anime in a blender and assume that whatever comes out the other side will be reasonably entertaining. Needless to say, these don't really count as a way anyone would watch anime, so let's just ignore them. Starting with chronological orders, we find that there are 2 subcategories, namely reasonable and bad. Humans, by nature, are bound by time, and we observe and experience things in accordance to that. On the other hand, stories are not bound by time and often take advantage of techniques that this freedom facilitates. The story may start in the middle, or even at the end. Multiple things could be happening at the same time, or you need a flashback to understand a character's actions. And no anime takes better advantage of this freedom than Baccano. Animated by Brainspace in the year 2007, Baccano boasts an impressive 11 main cast members for its 13-episode runtime. With that information, it should be obvious for those unaware of this anime that the perspective jumps around a fair bit, but it also jumps around in time between the years 1930 through 1932, focusing specifically on 4 different plot points, namely the creation of a panacea, the hijacking of the Flying Pussyfoot, the search for a lost brother, and an entire gang war. Remember, this is 13 episodes long, and if you think that providing all of this information in a non-linear fashion that sometimes jumps between years mid-episode would be confusing, then you would be right. For about 2 episodes. Once you familiarize yourself with the cast, it actually becomes a lot easier to keep up with what is happening. That said, it wouldn't surprise me if someone proposed that maybe it would be a good idea to watch Baccano in a chronological order. However, doing so would be a terrible idea. Firstly, as mentioned, the story changes time periods mid-episode quite often, and so a chronological order would not only have to dance around ordering different characters' perspectives, but also cut up episodes and rehash them. That just sounds like too much work, but if anyone did do it, I think they would find the creation to be rather unenjoyable. Now, with a work as complex as Baccano, it would take too long for me to thoroughly explain why this breaks the story, so let's instead look at a simpler example. The manga Berserk, written and illustrated by Miura Kentaro from the year 1989 until his death in 2021, begins with the Black Swordsman arc. Within this arc, all we really know is that our protagonist Guts has a really big sword, kills lots of demons, and is really angry. We don't know who he is or why he is here, all we know is that he must kill. In contrast to this, the second arc in the manga goes back in time to the Golden Age arc, showing the events that happened pretty much just before the Black Swordsman one. Now, what's happening here is a literary tool called framing, which is a narrative technique in which a story is surrounded by a secondary story, creating a story within a story. The purpose in doing so is to lend context and allow for deeper layers of understanding. To illustrate, in knowing that the younger Guts is going to become the Black Swordsman, the Golden Age arc is allowed to ask the question of why this time is so important to Guts, which, as you might guess, is an important factor in understanding his character. However, if these events were to be reordered chronologically, the meaning of the Golden Age arc would be at worst lost, and at best very diminished. This disregard of framing and several other things is why most chronological watch orders are bad. Sure, they are often made by people that have already seen the anime, however, that doesn't change the fact that in twisting a storyline into one that abides by time, you often have to wrench it from its literary supports that held it together. But there is a chronological watch order that does keep these things in mind. Steins Gate, animated by Studio White Fox in 2011, is one of the highest rated anime of all time, and it's a time travel story. With that said, it might be strange to suggest a chronological order because, of course, the timeline of the story is an utter mess, and to an extent that's true. However, the time travel in Steins Gate operates less on actual people time traveling, and more so just sending information to the past to change the course of events. As an aid, the protagonist, Hoenn Kyoma, has the ability to retain their memories when the timeline shifts, and as such, the chronological order, rather than following the objective flow of time, follows the consciousness of Kyoma. Because of this, the timeline remains linear until the end of the season, where it splits. Spoiler warning for one of the best anime of all time, the finale of Steins Gate involves saving the life of Makise Kurusu, who we know has been dead since episode 1. Unfortunately, Kyoma fails, and so in order to fix that, he gets a message from the future. However, since we don't know where this message came from, we have a split between the chronological order and the broadcast order. The latter promptly goes to show Kyoma succeeding and achieving the happy ending, after which follows the episode 23 beta, and then the anime Steins Gate 0. The former, on the other hand, or in other words, the chronological order, would be Steins Gate episodes 1 through 22, 23 beta, the entirety of Steins Gate 0, and then Steins Gate episodes 23 and 24. Now the question is, why in the world would you decide to do this? Mostly for 2 reasons. For starters, Steins Gate is relatively long given its 24 episodes in the main series and 23 in the sequel. The end of each series revolves around the same events, but since a lot happens in Zero before you get to that point, you may have forgotten what was going on, and so it may make more sense to view them back to back. The second reason, spoilers again, is that by watching Zero before you know that Kurusu has been saved, you can better empathize with Kyoma, who has made the conscious decision to let her go. That said, a fundamental part of stories is the suspension of belief, and so in some ways you already know how the story would have ended, and so Steins Gate Zero doesn't really need the helping hand. Additionally, you also end up putting off the grand finale until much later, which could be seen as a detriment to the pacing. Now, whether I think the chronological order is better than the broadcast isn't really important right now. Instead, what I find so interesting about it is that unlike other chronological watch orders, the Steins Gate one pays attention to what the anime is trying to illustrate and attempts to create a viewing experience that better facilitates that idea. After all, isn't that what a watch order is supposed to do? I mean, you wouldn't randomize the orders of episodes because then you would get a nonsensical mess, but if you watched it in the right order, then everything would be a lot better. The question, of course, being, what is that order and how do we find it? Well, I think the answer to that is to think of watch orders as a form of critique, although in a different form than what we're used to. The review, in going over what makes an anime interesting, what it does poorly, and what it does well, seeks to answer the question of whether you should or shouldn't watch the anime in question. Hence, the review quantifies the existing reality of the show. The analysis, on the other hand, seeks to answer what you get out of the anime, often pulling in sources from beyond the show in order to better define the meaning of it. Hence, the analysis seeks to explore the creative intent of the show. The watch order, however, stands between these questions of why you should watch an anime and what the anime meant. I mean, yes, it's literally between them because once you figure out why you're watching an anime, you then have to watch it to understand it. Jokes aside, the watch order aims to look at the existing reality of a work and dictates a way of watching it that best facilitates its creative intention. Take for example Naruto by Studio Pierrot. It has an impressive 220 episodes, however, 90 of these episodes have been dubbed as filler. They exist within the anime to fill time while the studio waited for the manga to catch up so that they knew what would be happening next. This resulted in a large chunk of side stories that didn't impact the world, characters, or progression of anything substantial. As such, their existing reality as part of the final product is a detraction from the creative intent, and so in order to better restore that, the Naruto watch order removes the filler episodes. Now there's an interesting phenomena happening here, that being that the anime is different from its source material. The reason for this is that anime is almost exclusively a work of adaptation, which by definition means that there will be changes to the story. A great example of this is in the ongoing manga Oshinoko written by Aka Akasaka and illustrated by Mengo Yokoyari starting in 2020. One of Oshinoko's arcs involves a popular manga being adapted into a stage play, which means having to account for a whole bucket of considerations. You need to find actors, choose how much of the story you're covering, how to build stage sets so that the scenes are immersive but also not so complex that it impedes the actors themselves, and most importantly, you have to take into account that the audience is sitting in seats. Myself specifically is all the way in the back. Depending on the size of the seating, I may not be able to see the actors' faces very well. In a manga, on the other hand, you can almost always see the characters' faces, which allows for the communication of emotion. Boom, there it is, taking up half the page. Look at that emotion. But I may not be able to see that during a stage play, which means that changes have to be made. Now, Oshinoko provides some techniques that modern theater has evolved in order to solve this problem. Large display screens show bigger pre-recorded images of the actors, music guides the mood, and a wind machine blows wind. All in all, the theater seeks to create the most immersive experience possible in order to create the most emotional investment. However, techniques can only take us so far. I mean, the display screens are nice, but I'm still supposed to be paying attention to the actual actors and what they're doing, which despite all the help, still comes down to the two most fundamental aspects of theater: the skill of the actors and the quality of the writing. Especially the second one. A manga comes out on a set schedule. Every week or month, a new chapter will be released, and it will continue until either the author finds a way to end it, it gets cancelled, or a whole myriad of other reasons. But regardless, manga is capable of creating incredibly long stories. A stage play, on the other hand, is limited to a set amount of time, which means you'll have to choose what parts you're adapting, and more importantly, how those parts will have to change in order to fit into your time slot and budget. But, now that you've made changes, you have to get approval from the author, which could go very well or very poorly. The author may say, yeah, do whatever, scrap the entire thing, or anything between, which then results in an equally large number of outcomes. This power struggle is the keystone of adaptation, and for anime it's a lot more complicated. Specifically, 33% more complicated because in addition to having to balance the interests of the author and studio, you also have to pay attention to the production company. You know, the guys with the money who aren't going to approve of anything if they don't think it will be profitable. Imagine the author saying a scene lacks the impact they imagined, and so they want it to be extended. The studio does some thinking and proposes that the anime remove the opening to provide the needed time, only for the production company to say that they don't have the budget for an additional 1.5 minutes of animation. Of course, the producers can't throttle the progress of the studio can't reject everything the author wants, and the author can't always have their say because if any party's interests get out of control, the anime will suffer, resulting in a poorer adaptation, or worse, a complete cancellation of the project. So, adaptation can change a story, but why is that important? Well, it's important because when there are changes, it often results in different broadcast and source orders, and it's important to know when one works better than the other. As for when you should prefer broadcast orders, the most iconic example is the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. Animated by Kyoto Animation in the year... oh right, I already did this. So, I tried to find some information on the creation of the first season because I wanted to find out the story of how it ended up being broadcast in such an unusual manner. Did the author give the studio free rein to do whatever they wanted? How did the producers feel about the nonlinear presentation? What was the director aiming for with such a bold choice? Unfortunately, when you go on the Google and look for interviews or information, you can't seem to find anything that isn't about the disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya, because of course everybody wants to talk about the movie. I also have the attention span of a goblin guide that's hitting the battlefield tapped and attacking. So, once I saw that there wasn't any information to be gained from skimming the top of the search results, I promptly gave up. That said, I looked up the summaries of the source novels, and based on that, I think we can form a pretty comprehensive idea of what happened. Here's the lowdown. For simplicity's sake, let's split up the anime into the episodes from 2006 and separate them from the new content in 2009. The 2 seasons and subsequent movie cover most of the content in the first 6 novels, which named in order go The Melancholy, The Sigh, The Boredom, The Disappearance, The Rampage, and The Wavering of Haruhi Suzumiya. The Melancholy, of course, serves as the introduction to the character setting and the initial set of shenanigans that Haruhi gets up to, and this novel takes up 6 episodes of the first season. The Sigh takes up the final 5 episodes of Season 2, and The Disappearance, of course, takes up the entirety of the movie by the same name. But that leaves the question of what the other 3 novels are about and how they fit into the anime. I mean, they fill up the remaining 17 episodes of the show, that should be a given, but more importantly, each of these novels is a series of short stories. The Boredom includes the stories The Boredom of Haruhi Suzumiya, Bamboo Leaf Rhapsody, Mysteric Sign, and Remote Island Syndrome, which respectively take place in these parts of the anime. The manga includes The Endless Eight, The Day of Sagittarius, and Snowy Mountain Syndrome, the latter of which is not in the anime, and the other 2 going here and here. Finally, the wavering short stories that made it into the anime are Live Alive and The Adventures of Mikuru Asahina, Episode 0, which leaves only 1 episode left, that being Someday in the Rain, which happens to be the only anime original episode. So, why is Haruhi like this? Why is the order of the anime so ludicrously weird? Well, because it just kinda has to be this way. Let's assume we know nothing about how Haruhi came out, and instead just look at the source material. Now, since we're smart, we're going to say that The Melancholy can be 6 episodes, The Sigh 5 episodes, and The Disappearance 4 or 5 episodes, I guess. Now, if we take the short story novels, we can probably get about 15 episodes of content out of them, making for a grand total of 30 or 31 episodes. The problem, however, is figuring out a way to put them in order. Going by novel order, we can make a pretty solid Season 1 with The Melancholy and Sigh together with 1 short story. That's 12 episodes. But problems start to arise when we get to the second season because it's just a whole bunch of episodic stories that will need to be trimmed or cut if the disappearance is going to be added. On the other hand, we could follow the chronological order, but that doesn't work either. The first season would be The Melancholy, followed by 6 short stories for the finale, the last of which would be The Endless Eight, making the end of the season a complete dud. Additionally, the same problem would bleed into Season 2, making it The Sigh, and then a bunch of short stories, which debatably could be cut to include the disappearance, save for the fact that that's going to end up becoming a movie. As such, the only solution is to mix in the episodic short stories with the longer arcs directly leading to the chaotic release of The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. Now, as for Haruhi, the broadcast order works because it was the best way to adapt the novels into anime, but there's more to the equation than just that. Reiterating, a watch order is a glue or union that connects the existing reality and the creative intent. However, like adaptation, doing so is an act of balancing several factors, which is something that a lot of people do very poorly because they tend to default their arguments entirely to one aspect. For example, I've said that the Haruhi broadcast is the best because that's how the novels adapt best, which is paying attention to the existing reality. But this doesn't include the factors of how well the short stories were integrated in order to enhance the creative intent. Fortunately, Kyoto Animation's adaptation is amazing, and it does enhance this intent, save perhaps for the Endless 8, which is where problems arise because who thought it would be a good idea to air the same episode 6 times in a row? In any case, that's a rabbit hole for another day, so let's get back on track. Anime adaptation is hard, and it has a lot of competing views, which heavily affects the outcome of the broadcast, but not always for the better because sometimes people make grave miscalculations. Let's look at X-Arm. Animated by Studio Visual Flight in 2020, X-Arm bears a rating of 2.91 out of 10 and hence earns its title as the worst anime of all time. Or at least according to my anime list, but at the very least I think we can still agree that this anime is pretty bad. But I don't think it was intended to be bad, or at least not at first. I mean, the trailer proudly declares war on all SF series of the world, however, contrary to this revolution, a single question began to grow as the anime aired. What in the world were they thinking? For context, of all the people included in the groups of director, writer, music, and anime studio, there were 0 people who had ever actually worked on an anime. But they had a vision for a 3D anime that would use real-time motion capture and live-action direction techniques to create something that nobody had ever dreamed of. I wonder at what point the team realized that their dream had become a nightmare. The problem with these goals is obviously a severe lack of experience that resulted in the existing reality of X-Arm being so bad that it didn't even matter what the intention was. However, this disparity illustrates a direct relationship between the existing reality and the quality of the creative intent. After all, storytelling is a skill, and so excellence in it naturally produces works that better show their intent. Thus, it follows that if there is a discrepancy in the adaptation, that most defaults to saying that the better watch order is the source order. A great example of this comes from the Monogatari series animated by Studio Shaft from 2009 to 2018, which has garnered itself a watch order of each type due to being a non-linear story, as well as having its second novel adapted into movies in 2016. Because of this delay, it was impossible for the source order to be properly done for some time, and hence a preference towards the broadcast order. However, the second novel, titled Kizu Monogatari, is so pivotal to the story that once it was adapted, the common consensus defaulted back to the source order. The reason for doing this, however, is a bit misguided. As per my findings, the cited reason is that the source order is the best order because that's the way they were written and thus the way that they were intended to be watched. To be fair, the Monogatari series is well written and adapted well, and so this preference makes sense, but I don't think the people saying this actually know what that intention is. I did some digging again, and this time I found a helpful interview. The author of the Monogatari series is Nisio Isin, and in 2017 a convention of sorts was held to celebrate his 15 years of publishing, during which he was interviewed and said the following. I wrote the Monogatari series with the intention, let's write a novel that would be impossible to adapt into picture. And yet, the anime exists despite this intention. If we were to follow the advice of watching Monogatari in accordance with the author's intention, then we should just not watch the anime. But of course, that's a terrible idea because the existing reality is that Nisio Isin ended up making a story that would need to be adapted in an extremely stylized manner. But then, what was Nisio Isin's intention? Well, I happened to find something about that in the interview as well. When writing novels, there's a part of me that writes wanting to see the ending thinking, I wonder how it's going to end. Wait, really? So you don't have the plot decided already? I don't. If I did, I wouldn't be able to feel satisfied whilst writing. So to explain this from the point of view of a character, for example, I tried putting a girl, Senjuga Haruhi Taga, into the story, but she's incredibly fierce. Then why is she like that? I write this sort of thing whilst continuing to search around and look deeper. That's why when the character is fully understood, the story ends. After writing, if I end at a point I'm curious about, I can write another additional work. Now, this isn't really an intention so much as it is a writing ethos. However, as the quality of the writing affects the intention, it ends up being kind of the same. As the interviewer commented, this lack of aim would make writing a mystery rather difficult, if it weren't for the extremely helpful processes of editing and revision. I know from personal experience how much these help because I often end up rewriting my scripts a couple times before I can even make an outline for what I'm trying to say. Likewise, I am also sure that once Nisio Isin has found the conclusion of a novel, there is a lot of revision that goes into making the novel better, especially in regards to framing. After all, while Nisio may not know what is going to come next, he definitely knows what has already happened, and as such creates the novels knowing the audience should have a certain level of knowledge up to that point. Therefore, the Monogatari series, despite each installment being its own story, has a through line of exploring the characters. Hence, the novel order works for the Monogatari series because its structure facilitates the intention. In other words, because it was written well. I feel like I just stated the obvious. In any case, at the end of the day, the real reason people don't know how to watch the Monogatari series is because the names are vague and don't explicitly say start here. You just have Kizu Monogatari, Neko Monogatari, Nisi Monogatari, Bake Monogatari, Owari Monogatari, Neko Monogatari again, and the whole bunch of titles that can be found under the umbrella of Monogatari's second season, which is technically the 5th season because why not? But in any case, that covers it for all the types of watch orders, and so the only thing left to discuss is an anime without a watch order. That's right, I'm talking about Fate, which, like the Monogatari series, has labeled all of its installments with names rather than numbers. There's Fate Zero, the 3 separate iterations of Fate Stay Night, Fate Apocrypha, Fate Extra Last Encore, Fate Collide Liner Prisma Ilia, Fate Grand Order, the list goes on, and the question most have upon learning about Fate is where are you supposed to start, and what is supposed to come next. Like the Monogatari series, each of these titles pertains to its own individual story. However, unlike the Monogatari series, there is no through line to an end. Instead, each installment focuses on a main character and their individual struggle with some sort of concept or ideal. Last Encore is about self-determination, Zero is about justice, Unlimited Blade Works is about self-sacrifice, Glide Liner is about family. Sure, the same characters appear in a lot of these stories, but outside of themselves, they do not build up to anything. Or at least, they haven't done that up to this point, and hence there is no foundation to build the order. In line with this, most discussions are not about how to watch Fate, but simply where to start, because after that if you're interested you'll just pick up whatever you want, and that's fine. So then, where do you start? Most people say that a good starting point is Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works by Studio Ufotable in 2014, and that's pretty reasonable. As a Watson archetype, the main character Shido doesn't have any idea of what's going on, and so the natural progression of him learning about the mechanics of Mage Society and the Holy Grail War allows for the audience to be informed of how Fate works without having to give massive exposition dumps. However, the second reason that Unlimited Blade Works is recommended as first is that you should never, under any circumstances, watch Fate Zero before it. The reason being that Fate Zero has massive spoilers for Unlimited Blade Works. But this is something that I simply do not understand. I mean, Unlimited Blade Works has spoilers for Zero, so it's impossible to avoid them in either order, the objection being that Zero is a prequel, so it's supposed to be viewed second. However, this idea has 2 problems. The first is that Zero came out 2 years before Unlimited Blade Works, but let's just assume that's because production thought it would be a more appealing story. The second problem, however, is that each installment of Fate is about the choices of its main characters. Regardless of whether I know that something is going to happen or not, what matters is how the protagonist reacts to that, which is something that I can't know until that thing happens anyways. Additionally, that thing, which is the spoilers I'm not talking about, is a deviation from the original direction that Unlimited Blade Works was headed, and so if I already knew about it, then it won't feel as jarring. Hence, I don't understand why the spoilers have anything to do with why Unlimited Blade Works should be first. I also don't think that Shido being a good Watson is enough to warrant the series as being the end-all and be-all of starting Fate. After all, Zero also has a Watson in the form of Waver Velvet, and since it came out first, the anime includes a lot of fundamental information in order to not confuse the wider audience that wouldn't have heard of Fate before its airing. Hence, I don't think that either of these are a better starting point than the other, and so I conclude that Fate doesn't have a watch order. I also conclude that I'm tired of talking, and so I'm ending the video even though I don't think I got to making half the points or really understanding what I even said myself. Thanks for watching, and I hope you make the next part of your watch order a slice of your own life.